All right, welcome to the Grid Snaps podcast video edition. I'm going to talk about that in just a little bit. This is the premier game development and design podcast. I'm here with Adam Pratt today to talk about arcades, which is a very interesting topic considering what we just gone through with COVID, coronavirus, whatever you want to call it, potato, whatever. But before we do that, let me just get some house cleaning items out of the way first. Now, what you'll notice is I'm doing this as a YouTube video first now and then podcast second. I'm still using Podbean. And by the way, just like I always say, of course, like the way to get us to more listeners and more popularity and more everything as I adjust levels on the fly on this microphone is, of course, to comment on our stuff, give us positive reviews on iTunes, on Google, and all of that, and on YouTube as well, because that's going to increase our listenership. So please show us your appreciation that way. It's much appreciated. But the reason I'm doing this as a YouTube first and as a podcast second, and by second it'll be like literally the next thing I do after I'm done with this is to put this out on Podbean and all that. So really, for all of you podcast listeners, it won't change much of really anything. But my thinking, and you can tell I'm really organized for this as I adjust the camera on the fly here. My thinking is, I think YouTube is kind of the future. Video streaming, I think, is a little more popular than podcasts at this point. And I love the podcast format myself, and I'm not going to give up on that, because I pay, with the other hosts, Patrick and Kip and we all pay for the hosting. So we're going to continue that. But I think I'm going to change it up to where I do it as a video, and then spin it out as a podcast also. Hopefully it will help build things. It'll be more fun. I think people, like, when I look at what my wife does, she'll put on these shows on YouTube on a nightly basis. That's what, we cut the cord. That's our cable now. And it'll be just like you see now. It'll be a person in a little window that you see here in the lower right, talking at a camera with like background and with some sort of video feed if they need to show you graphics of things. And I thought that would be cool. Now, if you're listening in the car as a podcast, you might lose a little bit of that, but not much. But if you are on YouTube, then you'll get to see the things I'm putting up on the screen as well. So just a little bit of housekeeping for you all. So, and the other thing, by the way, part of that housekeeping is as we're about to enter. I mean, oh my gosh, like let me think about this here. I think we started the Grid Snaps podcast with initially Kip, and then we added Patrick as a permanent co-host later. I want to say it was 2018, like November 2018. And so we've had, a year plus. It's going to be 2 years of podcasting soon. And so, wow. Yeah, I mean, that's a lot. And what I've kind of discovered over time is that the biggest obstacle is editing. It takes a lot of time, believe it or not, to edit this. So I kind of want to do this in a format where it's more live, so that I'm not like letting podcasts sit in the can on my computer. I'm sure, Adam, you've done media things. You know what this is like. You finish something, but you have to edit it, and it just sits there forever and doesn't get done, because this is not our main source of income, believe it or not. It provides $0. So therefore, it's going to get prioritized. So I want to do this in a way that makes sense, just to get it out there, right? Adam, what you've done podcasts, you've done your own like video production and all that. Like, how difficult is that for you to integrate into like your busy life?
Yeah, it depends on what ideas I have. Obviously, my ambition for what I want to do always outpaces what I can do.
Right.
But it gets crazier around trade show times when I have, a few hundred gigs worth of video to sort through and cut and edit and all that. But I mean, I've been trying to come up with things to do that. I mean, because you want to be creative, you want to do things that are different. Because I look out there, and obviously what I do is for arcades, and there's everybody does long plays of arcade games that they're playing on MAME or something like that, and it's like, well, I don't want to do the same thing. I've got to try and be slightly different, I guess. But yeah, there's plenty of times where I'll come up with an idea for something. I'll do all the filming that I think I need, and oftentimes you find out that you didn't film enough, or you come up with another idea after you've already done filming, and sometimes you just have to make it work, or you have to go back and film again. But it's extremely time consuming, and especially to make it look good, make it right, and all that. And so yeah, for free, it's just a labor of love, I guess. And sometimes that's enough to get you through, but there are other times where it's like, well, I can't focus on this right now. I need to focus on things that keep the bills paid.
Right. Yeah. And I'm trying to find that balance too. And I love doing the podcast. I'm totally committed to it, but you always tweak things over time. So this is a tweak. We'll see how it goes. Actually, there is one more bit of housekeeping, then we'll talk about the main thing that we brought you on to talk about. Those that follow me and follow the podcast, they know that and actually you can see this video feed here with guitars in the background. You can see them on my feed, and actually on my music YouTube channel, Rob Howard Music. I've done a few shows with a former student of mine, Conrad Honey, that just talk about music and guitars and that sort of culture. But I have a new album coming out. It's actually already released, but it hasn't hit. It's in the kind of digital purgatory, like where you submit the album and you're waiting for the distributor to push it out to Spotify and Amazon and iTunes and everything. But I wanted to at least mention it here. It's called Nevada, as in the state. And it's a bunch of solo guitar improvisations. Yes, don't don't stampede to buy this. I'm proud of it, of course. It's like when I'm a baby of mine, like everything else. But I do get that, I'm a jazz and improvisational artist, and it's maybe not everyone's cup of tea, but I still think it's cool. Why is it called Nevada, you ask? Well, it's because I like to name things after geographical places. There's a particular track on the album that I think is evocative of the really beautiful sparseness of that state. When I moved, as you know, Adam, I moved to and out of California in the last 4 years. And each time I had to drive through Nevada, it was always like, when people talk about like, we're going to run out of places for people to live. And there's try driving through the American West and you would never think that again. The vastness of the emptiness. And you're right there in Utah, and Nevada's just right next door to you. So you know what I'm talking about what Nevada's like, right? It's just empty.
I'm in the oasis of the desert here in Salt Lake City, but between here and I would say Denver and Reno, it's just this is the only real civilization that's in between those, and so it's very rural, very sparse. Plenty of places that haven't been affected by the pandemic. In fact, today in Utah, we had one of our counties has gone to green status because they had 3 cases total. And so they're just like, we don't need to do that anymore. But the scenery is, it's very inspiring, very beautiful. I love when I do have to drive for whatever reason to somewhere far away and go through this state or Nevada.
So just so people that are watching the YouTube feed, I just put the album art on the screen just briefly. It's actually one of my favorite. I know you can't see this right now, Adam. You'll see it later, but this is actually maybe my favorite album art I've ever done. I always do it myself, with the exception of the Christmas album. I roped a Human Head concept art to do it for me, because he's got the skills that I don't have. But what I did is I took a picture of when I was moving to California. This was from that drive. I took just a crappy cell phone picture right out of the windshield. And I just toyed around with it. I use paint.net instead of Photoshop because it's free. And just added filters and modified things and got it looking pretty cool. And that is the album art. So anyway, look for that. Probably by the time you listen to this podcast, it'll be distributed everywhere. Unfortunately, I use CD Baby. Who knows if I'll keep using them because they actually got rid of their own store. What I used to tell people with my music, and I have a ton of music out there. If you search Rob Howard, Pitch to Pixel, some pixel art albums I've done, other albums I've done that are more weird and jazz like are Zeitgeber and Whenever I Pass You By, and now this one. CD Baby actually offered their own store, right? So and then when someone bought the album on their store, you would get the highest revenue, and it was the fastest. It would appear on the store like almost instantly, versus all the other outlets take some time to propagate. Well, CD Baby, and I think it might have been a result of the coronavirus, I think they ditched that aspect of their business. They don't do that anymore. There's no CD Baby store. They're just a distributor now. When they just take your music and just pump it out to iTunes, Amazon, Google, Spotify, YouTube Music, anything. But they don't have their own storefront anymore, which I actually don't like. So we'll see what I come up with in the future for that. But for now, digital only release. I may try to do some sort of physical release. If you all bought a bunch of it when it came out, that would definitely encourage me to do a physical release and not just digital.
Do it on vinyl.
I would love that. That's actually one of.
There has to be a service that does that.
Oh, it totally can. There's when I did my last album, Whenever I Pass You By. Now, Adam, you thought you were coming on to talk about arcades. You're really just coming on to promote my stuff.
Sure. Buy Rob Howard stuff.
Yes, but there's a service, and actually CD Baby owns them, and there are other services too, but this one in particular is called Disc Makers, but they do vinyl also. The only thing that would stop me from immediately doing that is it's really expensive to do a vinyl run. I think it's like a minimum of $800-900 to do a vinyl run, whereas if I could get like really nice CDRs with like silk screened art printed on them for like $100, just to give you the price difference. So I would have to do, and I'm entertaining this. This is something I'm seriously thinking about doing. I'd have to do some sort of Indiegogo GoFundMe thing and like pre-raise that money, because I wouldn't want to spend $1,000 and have like a case of vinyl records that just stays in my garage forever.
Right.
Well, anyway, let's dispense with this topic now and go to the real reason why you're here. And you can see on the screen, folks, for those of you that are watching the video, you can see the Arcade Galactic logo. So if you haven't listened to, we've had Adam on a whole bunch. So just to reintroduce Adam to everyone, he is the blogger at arcadeheroes.com, which is the preeminent blog and website for all matters of arcade. It has been for a long time. And Adam also runs and owns and operates the arcade in Salt Lake City, in the Salt Lake City area, it used to be called Arcade Heroes, but now it's called Arcade Galactic. And that's the logo that you see on the screen. And we've had a lot of fun talking about arcades. Here at the Grid Snaps podcast, we care about arcade development. I think it's still a vital part of the industry. And I say still almost dismissively. That's something I want to really dispel. So before we get into what's happened with the coronavirus and all this, Adam, one thing, a huge misconception that people have is that arcades were awesome in the 80s and maybe had their last hurrah with Street Fighter 2 or whatever, and then just died. That's not true, right? That's complete fake news, as they say.
Yeah, exactly. And this is something that anybody that's followed me knows that I've brought up many times, but I guess my megaphone isn't that large to reach the general audience of our society. But yeah, that's generally the perception that's out there, and that's the type of thinking that you come across, or the premise that you come across when you're reading articles written.
Oh no, I think we lost Adam. I think, let me try to get him back, because this is a live show. Oh, there we go. Paragraph. Okay, you're back now.
Oh, am I cutting out? Because you're cutting out sometimes too.
You cut out for just a bit, and this is part of my challenge of having a live show that I don't edit, is I have to talk over that. But let me just quickly summarize what we had caught here on the video feed here. You had talked about how you've been trying to promote that idea of arcades not being dead, and it's just been difficult for you to get that idea out there. So that's where you left off.
Okay. And so the problem is that premise exists in all sorts of media that writes about arcades. And so if you come across a blog, some article that's talking about arcades, then they always start off with the premise that arcades are dead, and they say it in a way that's almost exactly like you posited it, where they were dead, but here they are talking about something new that is with that does have to do with arcade.
Right.
Oops, I've got my 4-year-old here.
That's all right. We are all family people here. And that's the, we got to fit this around that. I tell you what, people, if you donate millions of dollars to the Grid Snaps podcast, I can hire babysitters that will go direct to Adam Pratt and take care of his children, so we can have a free and clear podcast video presentation with no interruptions.
Sure. But yeah, and so the that's always a problem, and the thing that bothers me about it, being where I'm always finding out about the news and knowing what's going on in the industry, is that things have been happening in arcades ever since the early 1970s. They never went away. They never stopped happening. Now, there have been crashes. There have been times where there was a big dip or a bubble burst. And so some companies did go out of business, but not everybody went out of business. And so the problem is that around 2002 to 2004, maybe 2001 to 2004, you did have it where that a lot of the big names in arcades had stopped their developments. Atari Games, Midway were no longer making games for the business, but Sega and Namco still were. And not just for the Japanese market. Konami was still doing some things here and there, Capcom rarely. But, if you had an arcade business like a Chuck E. Cheese's or a Dave & Buster's, those businesses still existed at those times. And they've grown ever since then. Now, it's been a slow grow. And we also have had this fad that popped up. Well, I shouldn't say fad. We had this. Well, I first thought it was a fad. That's probably why I say that. But you had the bar arcade trend that started popping up at the end of the 2000s, the double O's, if you want to call them that. Right. And it just expanded. And so that's the challenge that I've had in promoting arcades, evangelizing them, I guess you could say, is helping people know what's going on out there. And one of the frustrations has been when a big new game comes out that people are familiar with, like a new Mario Kart arcade, or there was the Tomb Raider arcade, and these things would get picked up by the big websites like IGN or Kotaku or whoever else. But they would talk about arcade, they would talk about the game, and you could tell they sounded amazed, but they obviously don't understand anything about the industry. And they're almost like, well, I don't know who's going to buy this. And it's like, well, here's the thing is, it takes millions of dollars to produce an arcade game. Right. Eugene Jarvis, the CEO of Raw Thrills, and a name that I'm sure everybody listening to this is familiar with.
Defender.
Defender, Smash TV, Cruising USA, etc. He runs an arcade company right now. He built that out of the ashes of Midway, started it in around 2003, 2004. And he's stated multiple times that most of his big games take about $4 million to produce. Now, somebody is not going to spend $4 million on a game that nobody's going to buy, that's only going to go to people's retirement homes or something like that. You're doing that because there's a market there for it. And it's just, unfortunately, the game journalism media just ignores that a lot of the time. A lot of the time they also they know that places like Chuck E. Cheese's or Dave & Buster's exist, but another thing I often see too is how people say they're not real arcades because they're not exactly set up like I remember they were back in 1983. And it's like that's disingenuous. That's doing a disservice to that business and all the people that it employs, because you're dumping on the whole idea of what they're doing for their living, and it's not accurate. They're making money, and they've have made money. I mean, Dave and Buster's has been a public company, and they've had to put out statements and things of that nature to talk about their earnings, and they've been doing great. They've been making millions and millions of dollars, and Chuck E. Cheese's as well. And so, if its industry is dead, it's not making anything, at least in my view.
Right. And I've been showing pictures for the people that are watching on YouTube to kind of show, like, Defender, and then this is what I have up now is an image of a bunch of people playing. I believe it's Maximum Tune. That's Namco, is it not?
Yeah.
At a Dave and Buster's, and that looks like an arcade to me. That suspiciously looks like an arcade.
Right. Right. It's frustrating because, I mean, I understand it. There's a lot of collectors who look down on Redemption. I mean, I kind of look down on Redemption too, but I can't deny that it's part of the industry, and
Right.
it's just part of the reality. And I guess a lot of people are in denial about that. They don't want to accept it. It's like, oh, it's just kiddie gambling. It's like, yeah, but it still makes money. It still is what helps a lot of these businesses stay open so that they can buy the other games, the video games. And I guess another problem is that if you don't like that there aren't enough video games at a place, then why don't you go and play the video games?
Right. And what Adam is talking about, because I think it's funny, the terminology, which seems familiar, is there's just some subtle differences between arcade terminology and what people are now used to. And Adam says, play the video games. What he's really talking about, I believe, is the games that use a joystick and buttons, like the days of old. Because if you go into an arcade now, it's going to be racing games like I have on the screen there, or it's going to be gun games where there's a gun emplacement thing, or it's going to be some kind of ticket redemption. All those are legitimate arcade amusements, of course. But I think, Adam, it seems to me like you're talking about is the purest video gamer is going to go in there and expect something like Turtles in Time. They're going to expect Contra or Street Fighter or something like that.
Right. And I mean, at the end of the day, it shouldn't matter what the controls are. If it's a video game, it's a video game.
Right.
But that is the perception that some may have, that the games are too flashy or whatever. Or one issue that we've had that I've had to try and figure out how to navigate are video redemption games, where they are video arcade games, but you're playing them for tickets. But a lot of these games have amusement modes, so that if the location turned off the tickets, then it would play like a normal video game, in some cases like a classic video game. There's a newer Galaga called Galaga Assault,
which is awesome.
I have one.
Yeah.
And that when you turn off the ticket mode, it plays almost exactly like the original Galaga. Yeah, they did change a few things here and there, but it still plays like Galaga. It's not like this foreign game or fanfic version of the Galaga game. It's Galaga in HD, and so that does create a schism, I guess, of a sort, in how people look at arcades. But that doesn't mean that they're not arcades. I mean, an arcade is really just a place you go to play video games. It's not at your house. And a place to go to be entertained. It's kind of like the movie theater version of game consoles.
Right.
We can all watch movies at home, but sometimes, or at least we used to, go to movie theaters when they used to be open. But arcades are kind of the same thing. They're providing something a little different within the same genre. But I guess my original point was that I hear a lot of people complaining that, oh, it's not like the arcade that I know, so I don't consider it a real arcade. But if they go out to one of these places, why don't they play the video games? Because that's the things that people like me look at as an arcade operator. Is every week I'm looking at how much money the games make. As for one, I want to pay these things off that are not cheap. and they pay my bills, but I also am curious to know, what it is that people are really playing. And so all arcade operators look at how much these games make, as they use that to determine what they're going to buy in the future. And if people only play redemption games, then of course they're not going to buy as many video games, because what makes me my money, what pays all my bills? The ticket games. And so that's what causes this kind of problem, is as far as having fewer video games around, because people aren't playing them. And if they just would, if you would decide to go out to a Dave and Buster's, then the money talks.
Yeah, that sure does. Yeah. And as you've been talking, I've been showing videos of these newer games. Now, people may criticize, oh, it's just Galaga again, and I'm showing Space Invaders Frenzy, but they are different implementations. Like, they're using modern technology that didn't exist to present them in cool ways, and it's just to show that things are happening. And I think it's okay. I think it's actually okay to be like, hey, look, there is intellectual property that just happens to work very well in arcades, right? Because they were established in arcades. There's nothing wrong with that. Just like, Mario really got established on the console, so Nintendo's going to keep making Mario games, and there's nothing wrong with that. So there's nothing wrong with new versions of Galaga, new versions of Space Invaders,
because and that's something that a lot of modern companies just don't understand. Like the current iteration of Atari, they have absolutely no idea what to do with all of their stuff, and that's the problem is because they were designed for an arcade market where an arcade style play, which is very fast, very action packed, not a lot of or any story whatsoever, not much in the way of tutorials. They have to be intuitive as soon as you walk up to them, and you have to be able to figure out what you're doing practically immediately. And so, they plenty of companies have had trouble in figuring that out. But interestingly enough, a lot of these old properties, they're easy translations. Space Invader Frenzy, Galaga Assault, Centipede Chaos are all very easy to bring into the modern times. And sure, a lot of the kids have absolutely no idea that these were classic games, and they'll probably hear their parents say, well, I remember playing this when I was a kid. The kid's like, yeah, whatever. But but there's still these old IPs still have value. But I did find out something very interesting when I went to a trade show in Florida last year called IAPA. And as last year on the blog, I unveiled that there is a new Tetris arcade game that was being tested out in New York called Tetris Dimensions. And it was done by Play Mechanics, who is a company owned by Eugene Jarvis's Raw Thrills. It's headed by George Petro, who had a lot of history at Midway, worked on Terminator 2 Judgment Day, Trog, Dirty Pigskin Football, a bunch of games. But this Tetris Dimensions game wasn't at this show, and I asked them about it, and they're like, well, we had to cancel it because when we observed people playing it, we found that most of the people did not know how to play Tetris. They didn't understand the basic concept behind it. And to me, that blew my mind. It's like, how does somebody not know what Tetris is? But when they did their testing, people would just stack the blocks on top of each other until they hit the top. And so they're like, we have to figure out, how do we make this so intuitive that people who aren't familiar with the Tetris concept can play it? And so far, they haven't been able to figure that out yet.
Right.
So it's even a challenge, even with big names that are known.
So let's dig into this now. So one thing that we've been saying, and I'll actually back you up on this, the whole, hey, arcades were actually doing really, really well, and location-based entertainment in general is doing really well. And I can back this up because, before I started teaching at Purdue University, I was working in the 21st Century Fox organization, Fox Next specifically, which, if you've been following the news, was bought by Disney, and then Scopely bought them, and companies just keep getting bought and sold. But Fox Next had, I don't know if it still exists within Disney, or I have no idea what's going on with that. But they had a location-based business. So when we did one of our big all hands meetings, right, we got to sit through a presentation from their location-based business, and it showed pretty clear statistics that Round One and Dave and Buster's and amusement parks also, just location-based entertainment just in general was doing great. And this is only information that was a couple of years old. And when you think about it, the economy was really, really strong. Now it has been recovering. We hope it continues to recover, of course. And it was as strong as it's ever been in our life, basically. And so people were spending money on vacations, and not just vacations, but they were spending money on entertainment for themselves that got them out of their house. And that was clearly happening more and more and more. And I don't think people understood that. I think that was a quiet revolution that was going on. But then, and this is kind of what I wanted to talk to you about, then the coronavirus COVID-19 hit, which, of course, brought all of that to a screeching halt. So, Adam, why don't you talk about your experience battling this in Utah and kind of what you've had to go through with that?
Yeah. And to that, another thing, I wish I had the quote with me exactly, but Eugene Jarvis was interviewed last year for Replay Magazine, which is a trade magazine for arcades. And in that, he had stated that he hadn't seen the industry like this in a very long time, and that it was booming. It was the gist of what he was saying. And for myself as well, 2019 was the best year that I had seen in business. And I had opened up in 2008, originally started as Game Grid Arcade. Unfortunately, due to something that happened at the very end of last year, I had to change my name to Arcade Galactic, which Rob so kindly mentioned there at the beginning. But I just hit 12 years in business last week, actually.
Congratulations. So, that's awesome.
And that was an interesting thing I learned about arcades when I was first coming up with a business plan on this, was how many of them had survived for a long time, like decades, because most small businesses fail within the first year, much less 5 years. But arcades had a lot of longevity to them, which was pretty surprising. But yeah, 2019 out of all the years was the best. And then, of course, the pandemic hit. And I mean, I know everybody had hoped that it wouldn't have caused a shutdown, or I remember at first it was saying, oh, it'll only be for a couple of weeks.
15 days to stop the spread.
Right. But a couple of weeks turned into a couple more weeks and a couple more weeks and a couple more weeks. And so, I mean, I know as we're recording this right now, there are still some states shut down. Now, with Utah, as I'd mentioned earlier, I mean, Utah just has not been hit by this as badly as lots of other places, in good part because we don't have high population density. We do have some mass transportation, but not a lot. And there's those other factors that are out there. But so we were shut down from middle of March to the very end of April. And that's when the governor here did not issue an order. He issued a suggestion and allowed counties to kind of take the lead there. And so I'm in Salt Lake County, which is the most populous county of the state. And so they kept things locked down until May 1st for businesses like mine. Which, funny enough, for arcades to be such a non-entity, as some like to say, they actually did mention arcades in their restrictions by name.
Yeah,
so
I think they did in Indiana also. I think they probably just called it amusement, like public amusement businesses, but they were called out, I believe. Yeah.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah. For me, I mean, that was the one nice thing. I was like, hey, it actually says arcades, but I guess that means it didn't give me a loophole.
Right.
But actually, we also had something else that happened on March 18th. the day after St. Patrick's Day, and the day after I'd received a brand new Stranger Things premium pinball machine. I was jolted awake in the morning by a 5.7 magnitude earthquake, where the epicenter was only 2 miles north of my house. And so when you're close to an epicenter of a quake, the shaking feels a lot stronger than whatever it is that they say on there, or at least what other people say. And so that was the first thing that actually closed things down, because the mall where I'm located, where my business is located, still wasn't technically shut down. The county hadn't issued a closure order yet. But a week later, when the mall finally did reopen, because they had to inspect things, make sure that there wasn't any critical structural damage, and do some minor repairs. By that time, that's when the county did issue their closure orders. And so from there, it was just hoping it was going to be over sooner rather than later, for everybody, not just for business, but also just for the pandemic spread and all that. But
and I'll just
so we were
interject quickly, because I thought it would be appropriate to mention this in this podcast, is that obviously we're talking on purpose with a very narrow scope here. Like we're not making value judgments about public health and people staying safe in the way they feel comfortable.
I'm no scientist.
Just so folks know, so we're really just talking very narrowly about the impact it had on Adam's, particular business, irrespective of every state's response. So anyway, please go ahead.
No problem. And I mean, because this is my livelihood, and so obviously it was a pretty scary thing to face.
Yeah.
But along with millions of other people who have been put out of work, and what do you do? How do you get all your bills paid? How do you keep your children fed? And so, I mean, before there was closure orders, as soon as things started happening in other states where it was obvious that this was going to happen, it was just a matter of time, I did reach out to some of my lenders, because I do have equipment loans. I wish I was in the state where I could just buy everything on site with cash.
Right.
But when you have $7, $8, $12,000 machines, $20,000 machines, or higher, it's hard to do that. So usually you do financing. So I was able to get some of my payments deferred. Talked with my landlord, and I've heard plenty of stories out there. Some landlords have been very easy to work with, others have not. And of course, you do the same thing at home. Contact your real estate, your realtor, and see if they'll defer payments and all that sort of stuff. But so yeah, it was the hunker down strategy. But getting back into business, I mean, there was plenty of time to figure out how to go about reopening, because that was one of the things that had been put out there, was surfaces and the possible virus transmission through a touch of surfaces. Of course, it's been frustrating, because like so many other subjects on this virus, there's been a lot of conflicting data.
Right. Yeah.
Studies that say yes, studies that say no, and so it kind of leaves everybody wondering, like, well, how am I supposed to do something about this? Yeah, if it's yes or no. So you always take precautions, maybe an overabundance of caution. And so before any pandemic had hit, I always made it a priority to clean machines, sanitize machines, using Lysol wipes, sometimes more than once a day. And so it was just stepping that up. It was following any of the guidelines that the state had put forth. Employees have to wear masks. We also have copper tokens, which, from some scientific research that I had found, copper kills viruses. Yeah. So all sorts of viruses. I don't know if it had been tested with a specific one, but it had been shown to the virus, when it comes in contact with copper or a copper alloy, the viruses die within a few minutes, which is nice. So they're a lot more sanitary than I thought they were.
We've all learned a lot. Like, I think we've all become armchair
Yeah,
epidemiologists as a result
we
of
have.
this.
Right, exactly. And then I also added in a germicidal air filter made for rooms, but it has one of those ultraviolet C lamps inside of them that's also supposed to kill any viruses in the air. And so and I also did things like trying to move machines, give them a little bit more space in between each other. But as I came to find, at least in the beginning of this, it was very, very slow. There were times where I maybe had 3 customers a day, and so it was like, well, there wasn't any point to really moving machines because I
You had
literally had.
built-in social distancing just from the customer being, you know, like, yeah,
Right, right, yeah. You don't need a social distance when you're by yourself. Um,
right,
that wasn't as big a worry as I thought. 'Cause I've heard of other arcade operators where they would also do things like shut down every other machine, like especially if you have linked racing games, not have them all on. But again, I didn't really need to do that. But and then as customers started becoming a little bit more comfortable with going out and about, I mean, a lot, not all of them wear masks. I decided to leave it up to them, as I know some companies have enforced that, like Costco. But I also know that there are instances like there are certain children that may have medical issues that can't wear a mask,
right,
um, or even people, adults, sorry, that may have a medical reason that they can't
right.
wear a mask for a long time. And so I just have left it up to everybody's personal judgment on that. But there's also enough space around there, and we haven't had any issues with big crowds that we've had to force people to not come into the store or enforce limits. But I mean, now that I've been open for a month and a half, the past 2 weeks have almost been feeling normal
That's great.
again, and I'm able to. I'm think I'm making enough to at least cover rent and utilities and all of that. And I've gone quite a bit of time without paying myself, which has also been tough. And
Right.
I've done all sorts of belt tightening at home to survive that. But I mean, the interesting thing that I've noticed about it is that people still want to be entertained. Because and that's one thing that I guess I had an advantage with is that there just haven't been a lot of entertainment options open at
Yeah.
all, and so I was one of the very, very few that has been. And again, letting people know that we're doing everything we can. You already know. I'm not going to assume people are dumb. I'm not going to lecture them when they come in. It's like I know
Right.
you've all heard about social distancing. You've heard about masks. You've heard about sanitizing your hands. We've bought extra hand sanitizer and placed it around the arcade. And so I think I've done everything reasonable that I could do to keep things clean, and people seem to be fine with it too.
Yeah, and I think, let me just say, I so admire the can-do spirit that you've approached. You know, folks probably know we're friends, so it's not like, you know, I haven't like only talked to Adam today, so, you know, I've known about all these things. And of course, you know, when this happened, you know, my thoughts and prayers, frankly, you know, really did turn to you and your family, and really anyone else that had a business like that you know, was going to be right in the zone of what would have to be terminated, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And just the resilience you've displayed, the ability that you've shown to tighten your belt, to muscle through this and get to what we hope is the other side of this, has
Right.
been inspiring. I mean, it's just been like, you know, one of those things that you look at and be like, you know, I shouldn't complain about Purdue making me do a bunch of social distancing things in the fall because my employment is steady, and you know, I have friends like you that are having to do a whole lot more, you know, because of this. And we all care about people's safety, In my case, I care deeply about my student safety. I know you care deeply about your customers, and you're doing everything you can. But at the same time, here's the thing: like, I'm not here to tell anyone that's listening or watching this what this is. We have public health officials; they help us to do that. But at some point, humans are meant to interact, and that includes entertainment. That includes being in a space where we're being entertained in a social setting, and that's what really excites me about arcades. Is that not just because I grew up when arcades were kind of at the tail end of the original rise of the arcades, and I'm old enough to where the Street Fighter 2 boom in the arcades was something I remember, but because I recognize that we're social animals, Adam, and we need to be, and that's why I've taken so much time in this podcast to promote arcades, and I still think it's important. And so I'm so happy that you're getting through this. And I've been showing, as you've been talking, I've been showing video of actually you with your Exa Arcadia, which is really the future of arcades. By the way, how those guys are still around, right? Because I was worried about them too.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing, I guess, really quick before I answer that question. I mean, that is still the worry. There was a article, I think, that came out yesterday that Chuck E. Cheese's is looking at bankruptcy. And earlier on in the pandemic shutdown, Dave and Buster's had said something or admitted that they only had about 15 weeks where they could survive keeping their 15 weeks of cash flow to be able to stay open, and they've had to do some pretty drastic measures to try and keep the doors open from when they come out the other side. And it's like I have heard some people online cheering because it's like, yay, the non-real arcades are going to die. But it's like, I'm not cheering that, in part because that's the livelihood of a lot of people. Yep. I don't like seeing any company going bankrupt because, again, those are livelihoods. Yep. And how people are able to, that's their work. That's how they live. But that'll also have an effect on every other part of the industry that people don't see: the distributors, the manufacturers, the game developers themselves. Because if you don't have Dave and Buster's, if you don't have Chuck E. Cheese's, then that could lead to closures of other companies as well.
Less games available.
Go down. Yeah, you're going to have fewer games, and so I do know that for Exa, they have been surviving, and oddly enough, they've been almost one of the very few sources of news that I've been able to throw up on Arcade Heroes the past few months, because they have been announcing and releasing new games. I got one this week called Lightning Knights, which is a reworked version of Iron Cryptical by Tiki Pod and Confused Pelican. And and then just today ran a story about a new bullet hell shooter called Shikondo Red Purgatory, and they've of course got other things coming. And so, I mean, when it comes to manufacturers who may be best suited to survive this, I think the Exa Arcadia definitely is one of the better positioned ones, because as I've mentioned before, pricing on arcade machines is really high, and the average, I would say, somewhere $7,000-8,000 a game. And that is why you may not see a lot of brand new games at a lot of arcades. Like for me in the past, brand new arcades has usually been something like once, twice a year. And that's the same with a lot of other locations. You can add other games as far as buying up old used games and stuff. But if you want brand new, it's very expensive. But the X Arcadia, I mean, you have to buy the console itself, the computer itself, which is, I think, somewhere around $2,500, $2,500 to $3,000. And then the cartridges themselves are anywhere, I think I've seen them as low as $900 and as high as $1,500 each. And again, I know these are prices that sound shocking to game consoles. And
yes.
I guess for me now, when I'm like, oh, a game that's $60, whatever,
It's like it's free.
yeah. I mean, when you're accustomed to arcade prices, yeah, then it doesn't seem to be so bad. Or like if the PS5 is $600, as the rumors are saying, it's like, that's not so bad. But but I mean, I guess that makes me sound kind of pretentious. But as back in the day, before I got used to these arcade prices and financing, I felt the pain in the wallet. I wouldn't be a first early adopter with a lot of this stuff because I couldn't afford it.
I have to say, I've been
But
looking at Lightning Knights on the second screen here in the video
mhm.
presentation. It looks really darn cool, dude. Like,
It is, and like what I keep trying to put in my social media is how this is really the first RPG that the arcade industry has seen in years. I mean, RPGs never have been the type of genre that's worked really well in arcades because anything that allows you to explore and take your time with it doesn't really work for the format. But there have been some great adaptations through the years. There was Kadash by Taito. There was the two Dungeons and Dragon games by Capcom. There was the Gauntlet series, whether it was the original Gauntlets or the Gauntlet Legends, Gauntlet Dark Legacy. But still, it's just a handful.
right.
And so you have this, which has some RPG elements to it, but at the same time, it's like a little bit like Smash TV. And so I've been playing it and enjoying it. It is tough. That's the thing is, if you were used to playing redemption ticket games, then this is gonna curb stomp you. But but if you're a gamer, then it's a lot of fun and very enjoyable. And that's the thing that I love about this platform. And why I'm hopeful that it could really be the future of arcades is that not only is it low cost for our industry, which means that a lot of locations that do survive can get that, and then they can now add brand new games to their selection. I mean, because of the X Arcadia, I can say that I've already added 3 brand new games to my game floor this year, all through that.
Right.
And otherwise I would never be able to say anything like that.
Right.
And so and then they have a lot of stuff that's coming down the pipeline. I mean, it'll take some time. Obviously, there have been some delays. They were going to have a big event in May that over in Japan, where they were going to invite the public and allow them to play a bunch of these new games that were going to be announced, but because of course, the pandemic, that got canceled, and some of the announcements have been pushed back. But I mean, one of the big announcements they went ahead with is that Cave is coming back to arcades, and they're going to bring Dodonpachi Saidai back to the via the EXA, and like I said, there's other stuff that's in the works. It just hasn't been officially announced yet, and I think they're just kind of playing it by ear, as I think today was the first day that a lot of arcades in Japan have been able to be open, and so or sometime this week, and so they're just seeing how things go as they get back into it.
Right. All right, well, we thank you so much, Adam Pratt, for stopping by and kind of telling you your coronavirus arcade adventure. And you truly are an arcade hero for sticking it out through this and getting to the other side of this. We here on the podcast wish you nothing but the best as you continue to kind of rebuild the business. And yeah, man, just keep on keeping on, because we gotta have arcades. It would be it would just be a big loss to not have that amazing social in-person experience.
Right, and that was, of course, as soon as I heard of the concept of social distancing, it was like, oh no, because like arcades really are such a social experience. And so yeah, but also, I mean, you yourself are an arcade hero, and I really have to thank you for all the promotion you've done of arcades in general, of my own place. It's been super appreciated, that attention that you've helped drive that way, and so yeah, they'll survive this, they'll get through it.
Yep.
I'm just hoping that more will be able to than what it's kind of looking like. I'm hoping that they survive the bankruptcies, the bigger ones,
right?
Because we all need to be able to get through this for the industry to go forward.
Right.
But yeah, we'll make it. We'll figure it out.
All right, everyone. We thank Adam, and thank you for watching and listening again. If you dug this, I guess because I'm putting this on YouTube first, I have to do the thing where I say hit subscribe on my channel and click the bell. Everyone says that.
Smash that like button and subscribe button.
That's right. Hit that bell to get notifications. Yeah.
We forgot to throw in all the other words that have been out there during every commercial on TV, like during these challenging, unprecedented times. We're all in this together,
right?
etc.
Yes, that's right. So yeah, thank you for checking us out, and until next time, stay on the grid and keep well hid. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye.